Native American music fills the air in South Alabama at the Thanksgiving powwow of the Poarch Band of Creek Indians. It began over 25 years ago as a gathering of several Indian families, and it has grown into a national event attracting thousands of visitors to the area. Competitors travel from across the United States for the fancy dance contests. This style of dancing began in the 1800s when Indians performed for visitors to their Oklahoma reservations. Today, the Poarch Band of Creek Indians number over 2,000 and have a strong tribal government. They are the only federally recognized tribe of Indians in Alabama. Their reservation is a sovereign nation surrounded by the state. But things were very different before the chief. An anthropologist who visited here in 1941 called these people the Lost Creeks of Alabama and expressed regret that they had no leader to direct their efforts. Yet, in 1948, a man stepped forward to lead this group of people and forever change their destiny. His name was Calvin McGhee, but they called him the Chief.
Creating the awareness of the fact that we were still here is, in my opinion, the major accomplishment. He educated a lot of people, but just by the sheer fact that the cumulative effort of Calvin McGhee increased the awareness of people that we were here, at the same time raising both the awareness and the belief in our own people that we were unique, but it wasn't something to be ashamed of.
Unfortunately, we just lived in a rural community, remote, and somehow we were forgotten about. So it was time someone stepped forward and became a spokesperson for those issues.
The town of Atmore is located just north of Alabama's border with Florida. This is cotton country, and forestry is a major industry. Jobs were scarce when Calvin McGhee was young. He was born in 1903 to a farming family, and he carried on the family tradition of farming until just being the chief took all of his time. Like other children of Indian descent, he attended an elementary school in the Poarch community north of Atmore. But he was not allowed to attend high school.
It was obvious that he was not a man of great wealth. And when I visited in his home, it was a nice home, but obviously they didn't have a lot of money. But that did not seem to make any difference as far as Calvin was concerned in his family. He was well-spoken. If he had only a fifth grade education, you'd never know it. He spoke very well. He was comfortable in the company of anybody. You know, he was a regal, dignified person. He never raised his voice. He never got mad about anything. He was always sort of soft-spoken, and he'd look you right in the eye when he talked with you. He was impressive. There's no question about that.
McGhee became chief through his efforts to improve educational opportunities for the children in his community. He was also recognized as chief of all Creek Indians east of the Mississippi River because of his work to receive payment for land taken from the Creek Nation in 1814. Around 1960, he started wearing Plains Indian regalia for most of his public appearances and meetings with government officials.
First, he was very proud of his heritage. There's no question about that. Secondly, I believe that he understood what he was about so well that he used that headdress in meetings such as mine and with other congressmen over the years to impress upon them the seriousness of what he was about. It was done in a very formal way, not in jest at all. And he got our attention, almost single-handedly, and I think wearing that headdress was an integral part of his effort.
Poarch Creeks join members of the Muskogee Creek Nation of Oklahoma in a stomp dance. It is a symbolic reunion of people separated for over 150 years. Creek Indians from Alabama and Georgia were relocated to reservations in Oklahoma during the 1820s and 30s, but several families were left behind in South Alabama.
The Poarch Creek Indians are the descendants of so-called Friendly Creek Indians. The earliest records of their ancestors date from the latter part of the 1700s, when some of them, such as Lynn McGhee, most especially Lynn McGhee and Sam Manak, were interpreters for the United States government. During the Creek War of 1813-1814, they suffered many losses from the party of Creeks that were hostile to the United States. Their ancestors were largely of mixed blood descent, and at the with the blessing of the Creek National Council, sometime in the early 1800s, had moved down to the borders, southern borders of the Creek Nation. For good or for wrong, from Indian or white point of view, the ancestors of Calvin McGhee were the people who stayed loyal to the United States government during the Creek Indian War of 1813-1814, but they were, for all intents and purposes, despite treaty promises to the contrary, abandoned by the United States.
The Creeks of Alabama lived in poverty with little opportunity for advancement. They seldom left South Alabama except to labor as migrant workers. During World War II, Poarch Creek served in the military and saw more of the world. They returned home with a desire to improve their children's lives. The county provided a primitive grammar school for the Indians, but prevented them from attending high school. Calvin McGhee tried to negotiate with the school board. When that failed, he sued the board in state court. The suit lingered without results, so McGhee went to talk with Alabama Governor Big Jim Folsom in 1948.
When they went up there to see the governor of Alabama at the time, they had to go in a pulpwood truck. You know, somebody made a joke about it. Said, Calvin, how did you get up there? So we went in Adam's pulpwood truck. That's the only way we had it going. Then he went up there, and Big Jim was in there, you know, and they wasn't for sure if they'd get to see the governor. But he saw him standing out in the hall, and he hadn't met Daddy before. And he was eating lunch. His receptionist told him, no, you can't, the governor's eating. So he heard that Dad was out there in the hall, and he opened the door and hollered at him, and it was Dad and two more guys out of the community. Told him to come on in. He had his, he was eating lunch, and he had it in a brown paper bag. That's where he brought his lunch to the office every day. And they talked to the governor while he was eating his lunch.
Folsom recommended they find a young lawyer who would be willing to take the issue to federal court. Hugh Roselle fit the bill.
And we ran into a hornet's nest because we tried to meet with them. And we did meet with the superintendent of education and two of the board members that lived in this area. And all I could hear, I think I met with them by myself, those Indians are not going to come to our school. Those Indians ain't going to come to our school. And the principal of the high school said those Indians ain't going to come to our school.
I can remember when I saw Chief McGhee and several other of our tribal people in this community stand with arms outstretched to stop a public school bus so that our kids could get on that bus and go into town to school. I remember that. I saw that. I was about 11 years old at the time.
And the guy that was over the school board at the time, he told Dad, my two older brothers, they were kind of like complected like myself. Well, he said, well, Chief, he said, you just go on back and he said, the bus will stop and pick up your kids if you just, kind of let it go. Well, he shouldn't have never said that.
But he wasn't satisfied that the school bus would come along and pick up his children or two or three of his close relatives. He was interested in every child.
that when he first began on that strictly local issue of getting school buses for the children, there were some in the community who reportedly, many, who were not very enthusiastic about his efforts, that they'd been treated so badly, they'd gone on for so long. There's nothing can be done about it now. But he was a man of vision. He saw that something could be done about it.
Calvin McGhee's persistent lawsuits resulted in admission of Indian students to high school. The school board also built a new elementary school for the Indian community. But McGhee's court experience did not end in 1948 with this issue. In that same year, Congress created the Indian Claims Commission to settle treaties which had not been fulfilled by the government. A teacher in the Indian school brought this news to Calvin McGhee's attention. Wetumpka was a major town in the Creek Nation. Both French and Americans built forts here which have been restored in recent years. British, Spanish, French, and Americans all fought the Indians for land. Creek Indians divided over how to react, and a civil war erupted. A hostile group of Creeks attacked American settlements, but a friendly group sided with the U.S. government. The friendly Creeks helped General Andrew Jackson bring an end to the war. In an 1814 treaty signed in Wetumpka, Jackson seized 25 million acres of Creek land. Payment for the land was promised, but never made.
We went to Washington and we found out that the Oklahoma Creeks had already filed a petition to be paid for this land. And indeed, when we got to Washington, we found out that they had been heard by the Indian Claims Commission, and the Indian Claims Commission had awarded about $1,700,000, and the Oklahoma Creeks were willing to take it.
Well, the county had to put in a suit against the Creeks in Oklahoma. Besides, we had to get them to okay it. They didn't want us in on it because, you know, everybody at the time said, well, there's no Indians in Alabama. All the Indians was moved to Oklahoma.
The Indian claims just turned us down all holler. They took the argument of the lawyer, Paul Nebel, a very fine fellow representing the Oklahoma Creeks, that there were no Indians in Alabama. As if never heard of Indians in Alabama. And so what we did was appeal.
Calvin McGhee set out to prove that there were Creek Indians in Alabama and other southeastern states. He began recruiting members for the tribal council of the Creek Nation, east of the Mississippi.
He always called me sis. He said, sis, I'm gonna tell you something. We got to do something. I said, what's wrong? She said, we got to do something and do it now. If we don't, said, we just, all our time and everything we've done ain't gonna do us no good. He said, me and you got to take over. I want you, he says, to keep books, be my secretary. I said, Calvin, I can't do that. You know I ain't got that kind of education. Yes, you can. Me and you together can.
Roberta Sells kept the tribal roll. But as word spread that descendants of Creek Indians might get a check from the government, people came from miles around to see the chief.
When they started making the roll up for to get on the land claim, and word just spread like wildfire. Descendants from the Creek Nation. So it was up in the night, early in the morning, coming from different states. That there's roots back here, but they just heard about it and come in to get on to be recognized as a tribal member.
Just before we got ready to go into the United States Court of Claims, we filled up several rows of Indians, and they really were Indians, and they looked like Indians, and Calvin's mother was in that group, and the case went well.
Once the decision was made that we could share in the Creek Judgment Funds, then came the challenge to document all these people who claimed to have an Indian ancestor. Now, individually, if we knew who all of our Indian ancestors were, we could fill out our own papers, provide our own documents, and send them in to the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Now, there were some people who were not able to do that, and that's where Joyce, who was Calvin's wife, and Calvin and them, they provided assistance and helped people fill out their papers.
Every chance they got, they was going hunting records, digging records, getting different documents.
Calvin McGhee and his wife Joyce helped hundreds of Indian descendants prove their Creek ancestry. They studied records in Washington historical collections on their many trips there to appear in court. The Indian Claims Commission made an award in 1958, but Calvin McGhee thought it was too little, even at 1814 land prices. There were many hearings and many days in court. As years went on, the commission was moved by evidence presented by Chief McGhee and his attorneys.
He had to let the farm go. He couldn't do the farming because he was just staying too busy. As soon as you get out in the field, somebody would pull up at the house wanting to talk to the chief. And our community people, any little problem they had to come see Dad to help them decide what to do, you know, how we're going to do this and all. Well, that took up the rest of his life, that in the suit.
I remember on occasions, you know, just how this community rallied when he would get a telephone call requiring his presence in Washington, D.C. He didn't have the money to travel, but this community would rally. They'd bring food together, and they'd sell plates and all, raise the money for him to go to be there to represent our, you know, our people here.
McGhee met other Indian leaders in Washington and became active in Native American issues on the national level. One National Indian Conference led McGhee to a meeting with President Kennedy in 1962. Olivette McGhee was with him.
I've never been in the White House, but I was on the yard. I keep saying, well, these years I'm going to go back to Washington and actually go through the building. But yeah, he came out of the, what is it, where the Rose Garden is there, the South, where he always makes his speeches and stuff. And then Kennedy said to him, you know, about he didn't think he was an Indian because he had blue eyes. He said, I never heard of a blue-eyed Indian.
The blue-eyed Indian chief also met with President Johnson as the land claims case continued. Over the course of several years, McGhee and his attorneys presented historical evidence regarding the value of the Creek land in 1814. The many trips took their toll on the chief.
Dad almost lost his place here because of borrowing money, and he spent it on the business. The suppers wouldn't make up all the money every time, no way. So he ended up borrowing money on his place, and matter of fact, when he died, us boys, we had to pay the place. We had to take care of that then, or else it would have been lost. And Daddy come close to losing it several times.
We went to court many times, either in the Indian Claims Commission or the United States Court of Claims. We got the amount up to, and the Oklahoma Creek spoiled us, up to $2,700,000, then $3 million, and then $3 million something else. It's a little bit more. And then at last, we got the amount up to $4,003,000. And we agreed to accept that amount.
Toward the end of his life, by some accounts, he was practically the sole surviving force in all of this because the land claims case dragged on for so long that some of the original council members that had been elected in 1950 to help fight this case began to lose hope. And it was really Calvin McGhee in the latter years of his life before he died in 1970 who carried on this fight.
I would have liked him to know or been able to see some of the things that he was really worked hard for. But, you know, he died in June, and we got our first check in December.
Lord, lead me on, Lord, lead me on, from day to day. I want to walk the holy way.
Calvin McGhee is remembered each year in a graveside service on his birthday in March. Family and friends gather to pay their respects to the chief. Nearly 14,000 Creek Indian descendants, east and west of the Mississippi, received checks for $113 each from the land claims case. It wasn't just the money that the chief had worked so hard for. He united a forgotten group of people and brought them to national attention. Eddie Tullis, Buford Rowland, and others inspired by Calvin McGhee have worked hard to improve social and economic conditions. The federal government had forgotten the Poarch Creeks until Calvin McGhee came along, but in 1984 they were recognized as a sovereign Indian nation.
Calvin never seen anything built here. You know, Calvin left here without us having this tribal center or without us really owning anything as a tribe. So you have to respect an individual that had enough vision to convince people to help him do things that had to be done without having something physical to show them. And his holdings actually decreased during the effort. You know, Calvin sold off his property and all to fight the battle without a lot of people even being conscious of that. So, you know, when an individual has an extended involvement and when you can see a person continue to make the decisions that are necessary to continue an effort, those are the kind of people that need to be remembered.
Dr. Tony Paredes has written extensively about the Poarch Creek since 1971. He has seen many changes.
And they had gone from, in the early 1970s when I first came, no corporate assets beyond some stationery and a few dollars earned from their annual powwow and things like that. Most people working for others as in the paperwood industry or in small manufacturing plants or in agricultural labor, including migrant labor, to becoming now, in the 1990s, a very potent and important economic force in that part of Alabama, and indeed one of the largest employers in the county where they live, in employing many other people in addition to their own in their various enterprises. And they now have their own police station, their own court system, their own fire station, and they are a government. Their lives have been politically, economically, socially transformed. And along with it, there's been a fluorescence of interest in their cultural heritage, a fluorescence of interest in the arts, and great educational gains. They count among their people now graduates all the way from local community colleges to literally Harvard University. So they've come a very, very long way, and much of that is the result of the single-mindedness of this rough-hewn, poorly educated character from Alabama and the backwoods of Alabama, who was determined first to get better education for the children of his community, and then to right past grievances, and then to point the younger leaders of the community in the direction that they've now followed and have transformed their lives.
Calvin didn't see the thing to the end. He saw like Moses. And there's no doubt in my mind that Calvin went to the mountaintop, and he knew that we were going to win this case, and he visualized all of these things that Eddie Tullis and the others have done. He realized that was going to happen in our case, and he had the ability to put it across. Calvin gave his whole life and soul, but thank God he did realize, like old Moses, he saw the promised land.